Welcome to the Anitra Jumpsuit Sew Along for Style Sew Me. This pattern is available on my website, stylesewmepatterns.com. This is the jumpsuit that we're going to be making. It's a very loose fitting and very comfortable and stylish jumpsuit. So before we get started, I want to go over a few important tips. So hopefully you've got your sound on. The seam allowance for this pattern is going to be a 1/2 inch unless otherwise stated. You're going to use a stretch stitch on your sewing machine when you're using a stretchy fabric to prevent pop stitches. I won't be mentioning it, but you need to serge your raw edges if you prefer. Also, if you plan on hemming, use a twin needle or stabilize your fabric for a smooth finish and to prevent the waving at the hem. Now let's get started on this project. So starting with your bodice, you want to grab your front and back bodice pieces, lay them right sides together, and we're going to pin across the shoulders and pin down the side seams underneath the sleeves. Stitch across both of your shoulders and down your side seams at 1/2 inch seam allowance. So while we're here, let's go ahead and hem it. Who says you have to wait till the end of the project to hem? So go ahead and turn your sleeves up 1/2 inch and turn your neckline up 1/2 inch and stitch. So let's move on to the pant. Go ahead and grab your side back pieces and lay them out right sides up. Then grab your pocket pieces and we're going to attach a pocket piece to your side back at the side seam. Go ahead and use your notches to line up your pockets easily. And you're going to do that on both sides. And then we're going to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance for your pockets. Now we're going to attach our pockets to the pant back. So open out your pant back, right sides up and right sides facing. You're going to attach your pockets, same as we did on the side back pieces, and you're going to use your notches to line them up and stitch them with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now we're going to attach the side back pieces to the pant back piece, and I just want to show you from this angle to give you a better perspective, but I'm actually going to turn my pattern piece around so that I can access it a little easier and so you can see exactly what I'm doing. So you're going to lay your pant back with the pocket pieces facing out, right side up, and then lay your matching side back piece with your pocket out, right sides together. And then we're going to stitch down the top, around the pocket, and down the side seam. You're going to repeat on the other side for the other side back piece. And once you're finished, you're going to have one great big gigantic pant back piece with your pockets secured. So I started from the hem and I'm sewing up. And when I get to the pocket, I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch past the beginning of the pocket, leave my needle in, raise my presser foot, turn my fabric, lower my presser foot, and begin sewing. You want to sew around your curved pocket slowly. It looks like I'm going fast because I've just sped up the video, but I'm sewing very slowly and carefully to make sure that I have an even seam allowance all the way around. Once you get to your pocket seam allowances, make sure your seam allowances are pointed towards your pocket. And then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to sew a 1/2 inch in, lower your needle, raise your presser foot, turn your fabric, and then sew the rest of your seam. And so now we're going to repeat this same process on the other side of the side back piece. So right sides together, you are going to lay your side back piece on your pant back, pin, and you're going to stitch starting from the top this time, going around your pocket and down the side seam. Phew, okay, you should have one big gigantic pant back now, and you should have your pockets secured. We're going to do one last thing on this part of the pattern, and that is hem. So on the outside of your side back pieces, you're just going to turn in a 1/2 inch and hem on both sides. So let's move on to the pant front. We're going to do the same thing in that we're going to hem the outside edge of the pants first. So now we're ready to attach the pant front and the pant back together. Right side together, lay everything out. I know it looks like it may not match, but it will. Just match up the bottom edge, which is your inseam and crotch area of your pant front and pant back. And then we're going to stitch those together, 1/2 inch seam allowance as usual, and press the seam allowance open. Since this is such a long stitch and you are working with stretchy fabric, make sure to pin frequently to make sure that everything lines up the way it needs to. To give yourself a nice rounded hem, you're going to take the seam allowances from the seam you just sewed, and just on the edge there, you're going to tuck your seam allowance to one side, and you're just going to tack it down with your sewing machine. So now let's position this pant so that it starts to look like pants. So lay everything wrong side up so the seam allowances are facing you. And so we're going to fold in the side backs, and you're going to have those points at the top meeting at the middle, at the center front. Go ahead and tuck your pockets in. Doesn't have to be pretty, but let's just get the idea. And then you're going to take your pant front and fold it up. Okay, let's get a little closer here. So we are going to take the side back piece, which is underneath your front piece, and we are going to pin those two together. So again, we're pinning the pant front and the side back together. And then you're going to sew your basting stitches, securing those two layers together. So I'm just going to flip my pant around so that I can access it easily since I'm right-handed. And one more time, we are going to pin the side back piece to the front of the pant all the way across, and we're securing that in place so that we can gather the pant. So when you sew your gathering stitches all the way around the top of the pant, you're going to leave a 1 inch gap at each side seam. You're not going to gather in that space. So we are going to sew in our gathering stitches, and you're going to start your basting stitches for your gathering 1 inch away from the side seam, and you're going to continue sewing across the front of the pant, stopping 1 inch before you get to the other side seam. And the same goes for the back of your pants. You're going to start your gathering stitches an inch from the side seam, go all the way across the back of your pant and stopping your gathering stitches 1 inch away from the other side seam. To gather your pant, you're going to grab your bobbin thread and pull carefully to scrunch up your fabric and make it form into your pant. Now you're going to gather your pants until they are the same width as your bodice. And you can just line them up against each other like I've done here in this portion of the video to see if you've got the right amount of gathering. And make sure that your gathering is evenly distributed because you don't want it to be too bunched up in one area and not gathered enough in another area. So take your time and get this done. Now you want to stitch your bodice to your pant, and so I'm just matching up my side seams on my bodice to the side seams of my pants. I'm going to pin there, and then I'm going to pin at the center front and center back, and then I'm going to pin everywhere else in between to secure it. We are going to stitch this waistline seam at 1 inch seam allowance because this will become the casing for our elastic. So be very careful when you are sewing this seam because sometimes your gathers can kind of bunch up even though you've pinned them securely. So sew slowly and just kind of feel everything out with your fingers as you go to make sure your gathers remain evenly distributed. So next up, we're going to take some bulk out of that waist and we're going to trim the pants seam allowance, and that is the seam allowance that is gathered. So go ahead and trim that down to about 1/8 of an inch or about 1/4 of an inch down to the stitch line. So now we're going to create the actual casing. You've trimmed down the bulk, and so now you're going to turn down your bodice seam allowance. If you would like, go ahead and finish the raw edge with your serger just to give it a nice clean finish on the inside. Now what we're going to do is stitch 1/8 of an inch from the bottom edge of your bodice seam allowance, and we're going to sew through your pants. So watch as I'm putting my jumpsuit on my sewing machine, just adjusting everything. And I'm turning down my bodice seam allowance, and we're going to sew through the bodice seam allowance and through the pant. You can stitch all the way around, making sure again that your gathers remain evenly distributed. And I'm folding my pocket facing the front of my pant, and then I'm going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the bottom edge of the seam allowance all the way around, and I'm going to leave about a 2-inch gap opening so that I can insert my elastic into the casing. So next I'm grabbing my elastic and my bodkin, and you can purchase a bodkin at Amazon or Joann's, and I'm going to attach it to my elastic, and I've cut my elastic to be about 4 inches smaller than my waist because I want to give it a good wrap around my waist. And so I'm going to insert my elastic through the gap that we left open. And I'm holding the end of my elastic in my mouth or somewhere that is secure because you don't want that elastic to get sucked into that casing. So now that I've got both ends of my elastic, I'm going to just secure them using a zigzag stitch. And be sure to hold your elastic securely still because you are still at risk for your elastic turning inside of your case. So just kind of pay attention to that. Once you've secured your elastic together, then you can go ahead and evenly distribute your gathering. Let the elastic let up completely into your casing. And then we're going to stitch our casing closed. And you are done. Well, this concludes the Anitra jumpsuit pattern sew along. Thank you for your purchase and thank you for your support. This pattern and my other sewing patterns can be found at stylesewmepatterns.com.